られるときに受付に連絡してください。本体とイヤホンをセットしてですね、忘れることなく返却をお願いいたします。それから名札も明日またいらっしゃる方はそのままお持ちになって結構なんですが、今日だけの方は名札も忘れることなく受付に返却してください。よろしくお願いします。それから写真撮影についてなんですが、これは繰り返しになりますが、許可を受けた報道関係者以外の方はおかけください。それから午前中にですね、写真撮影をおやりくださいというときに、ツイッターのことをお話ししましたが、ちょっと誤解、こちらにそこまではどうか、するのはどう制限するのはどうかという意見が来たんですが、ちょっと誤解があったようなので、ちょっと説明いたしますと、ツイッターに写真をアップするのをやめてくださいという意味で申し上げたのであって、ツイッター通信をやめてくださいという方ではありませんので、その点ご了承ください。
すみません、ユーストリーム配信をご覧の方ですけども、質問の方は、#CSRP14 というハッシュタグの方でご質問。
Us and send a message on #CSRP14 #CSRP14 for any questions you have.
それでは、もぐもぐセッションにリポート権利を始めたいと思います。講演者は谷岡久美子さん、宍戸俊則さん、松田陽子さんです。そしてモデレーターは川崎健一郎さんです。川崎さん、よろしくお願いします。
はい、ただいまご紹介に預かりました弁護士の川崎健一郎です。セッション2のモデレーターという役を仰せつかりました。これから2時間ほどよろしくお願いいたします。そのままで失礼いたします。最初にですね、簡単に私の自己紹介をさせていただいた方がいいかと思うんですが、私、福島の子どもたちを守る法律家ネットワーク、西部福島チルドレンロイヤーズネットワークの頭文字を取りまして、サブランという活動の共同代表を務めている弁護士です。2011年3月11日の東日本大震災、そして原発事故の発生以降ですね、いわゆる自主避難と呼ばれる方々、政府の指示による避難ではない、その区域外からの避難、その方々の支援活動に取り組んでまいりました。その過程でですね、本日お話しいただく3人の方々とそれぞれ交流があったりですね、一緒に仕事をさせていただいたことがあると思うんですが、本日のモデレーターという役を仰せつかったものと考えております。さて、2011年の原発事故の発生から3年半が過ぎました。原発事故の収束宣言というのが早々となされたわけですが、いまだに不安定な状況が続いているのはご案内の通りです。原発事故以降ですね、広範囲に拡散した放射性物質の被害工作を
We have seen the efforts of people who are trying to evacuate it free from the spread of the radioactive substances. That's what we call as evacuation from nuclear accidents. And as I said briefly, there are official evacuees who have under mandatory evacuation orders from the government because they live in certain areas, and there are others who are living outside of such a zone who self-evacuate. In terms of the total number of these self-evacuees, we do not know how many people there are, and I believe Professor Matsuda will touch upon that. And it is said that there are about 100,000 people who are considered to be self-evacuees. However, I believe that so many people are not accounted for, especially if we include people who are temporary evacuees right after the March 11th. And we have seen passing 3.5 years since the accident, and at least even now, over 100,000 people are living as evacuees. That such is the backdrop, and I am a lawyer, so therefore I'm an expert in the legal studies, and I'm wondering if the legal studies as well as other social studies branches have served their roles within this situation. And were we able to really face this issue face to face? We have been talking about risk communication this morning, but in a way, the communication has been unilateral and one way. And I think the whole issues and the reality has been trying to put into such rough framework. But despite such situation, it is not the case that citizens did not do anything. There has been quite a movement and activities in the past 3.5 years among the citizens. So I'd like to touch upon such activities first of all. And in a way, that's a good introduction to the roles that are played by the three presenters of this session 2 as they served specific roles. The first activity we have seen is right after the March 11th. There were movements among citizens who call for the government to take back the 20 million before the March 11th, but the government released for making 20 millisieverts the new official threshold. And there was a criticism and movement against it. Mr. Kosako gave a press conference, and he cried during his press conference saying that 20 millisieverts for children is unacceptable. I believe you remember that press conference. Within such movement, there were voices calling for the right of people to evacuate. Within such movement, there were voices calling for including self-evacuees within the compensation scheme. That has been the major movement among citizens in 2011, the initial year. As a result, at the end of 2011, interim guidance that was released by the special committee under the Ministry of Education wrote about the right of people to decide on their own evacuation. That has been the initial movement in 2011, if I may summarize. During that time, what was happening in Fukushima, especially within schools in Fukushima, that's what the first presenter, Mr. Shishido, will talk about. Next, in the continuity of such citizens' movement, we have seen new movements in 2012. In the beginning of 2012, there was a movement calling for the right of people to evacuate themselves. That kind of movement among the citizens connected with the people, the politicians, and that is how we've seen a very rapid enactment of a new law, Act on Protection and Support for the Victims of Nuclear Power Plant Accident. And this was, in a way, one big major milestone among such movement. This will be touched upon by the second presenter, which is Ms. Kuniko Tanioka. She's a legislator, she's a politician who was truly involved herself in making this act a reality. The details of this act on protection and support will be touched upon by Ms. Tanioka. But however, if I may add, the very first article of this act actually clearly admits that the health impact of radiation is unclear. And so therefore we need to base ourselves truly on a scientific principle of prevention to allow people to evacuate, to live outside of the radiation possibility. That was the basic content of this new act. The fact that this act was enacted was a major milestone, as I said, especially during the second phase of people's movement. But such kind of momentum was somewhat waned. At the end of 2013, we have seen a new election that has seen a shift from the Democratic Party to the LDP. terms of the governing party. At the time of the preparing of the Act of Protection and Support for the Victims, there was a bipartisan movement, non-partisan movement of cooperation, but that has been waned, and many people who were behind this act lost their election. But at the same time, the more horizontal cooperation among the citizens got even deeper. There were alliances made among citizens and organizations, and even some organizations, for example, the Bar Association of Fukushima, who were initially not very active, started to involve themselves as well. And one major milestone within such situation is the report that was issued by Alan Grover, the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on the rights of people on health, who unfortunately could not attend this session today. He made a recommendation within his report to look at the radiation risk of people and respect the right to health. Perhaps this movement, especially within 2013, has been the phase 3, and then we see another phase of this movement in 2014. We are seeing the rapidly waning interest of the public on the nuclear power accident and radiation. But, however, there are efforts done to write reports, papers, and leave scientific evidences and documents to report it for the next generation. This is the effort to create the white paper, and this topic will be covered by Professor Matsuda from the Kwansei Gakuin University. She is member of the editorial and drafting team of this white paper. But one commonality among these three people, the three presenters, is that they all are involved in the human rights of evacuees. I'm sorry for my long preface. But first of all, I actually would like to listen to the message from Mr. Anand Grover, who could not be here today.
Of March 2011. Good morning, konnichiwa. Good morning, konnichiwa.
会場の皆様、こんにち 私は
I thank you for inviting me
こ
to
の
speak
シ
at
ンポ
the
ジウムでスピー
symposium.
チする機会をいただけた
I
ことに感
apologize
謝
for
しま
my
す。
absence from this
本日
event.
は参加できなくて申し訳ございま
However,
せ
I would like
ん。
to
し
take
か
this
し、この機
opportunity
会
to
に
speak once
再
again
度
in favor of the rights of persons
2011年
who
3
have
月
been
の原子力
directly
災
or
害により
indirectly
直接的
adversely
および間接
affected
的に悪
by
影
the
響を被
nuclear
った人
disaster
々た
of
ちの
March
権利を維持する
2011.
ためにお話をしたいと思います。
Almost exactly 2 years back, I was in
2年ほど
Japan
前に
on the
特別
mission
報告
as a
として
special
の任務の
rapporteur.
ために日本を訪れました。
Later, I presented my
今回の
findings
原子力
on the
災害
nuclear
により得た
disaster
情報を日本
in the
における
official
正
country
式な
report
報告
to
書と
the
して
Human
人
Rights
権委
Council.
員会に提出いたしました。
The report very clearly
その
states
報告書には
the position stance, which is reflected in my report. Namely, there is a risk of cancer regardless of the amount of ionizing radiation a person is exposed to. In other words, there is no low-dose threshold of ionizing radiation which can be said to be safe. It has been my position that in assessing the immediate and the long-term health effects of radiation, international organizations and the government of Japan have not taken into consideration lessons learned from Chernobyl. The population affected by Chernobyl has still not recovered from the ill health effects as well as social and economic effects brought about by it. The UN Scientific Committee on Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSCEAR, a committee set up by the UN with the mandate to assess and report levels and effects of exposure to ionizing radiation, has stated that for the population affected by the accident, cancer rates are expected to remain stable. The committee's other findings on health effects of radiation are that there is only a theoretical increased risk of thyroid cancer amongst the exposed children, no impact on birth defects, hereditary defects, and no discernible increase in cancer risk for workers. The Japanese government has largely supported the committee's findings. However, quite a few people I met in Japan, including some scientists, are opposed to this step. I'll confine myself to the topic of the session and talk about the rights of the people affected by the nuclear disaster. The right to health includes the right to physical and mental health, but it must not be understood that it is only the right to health care. It is not an isolated right, but brings within its fold the underlying determinants of health, such as food, housing, clean water, healthy environment, etc. It is also informed by other rights, such as the right to information, non-discrimination, participation, etc. Further, it must be remembered that at all times, and regardless of whether the state has means, the rights of vulnerable groups, such as the elderly, children, and persons with disability, must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. The moment the state fails to ensure any of these underlying determinants or the rights, it may have breached the right to health of the affected individuals. Regardless of the science involved, following the tsunami and the nuclear disaster, there have been many violations of the rights of the people, including the right to health. Further, the immediate and long-term effect of the disaster on people's lives and health and on the enjoyment of their lives is evident. The sudden and unplanned displacement of people, confusion amongst the highest levels of government, and the inability of the authorities to provide information cause preventable and lasting harm to the people. For certain groups, the effect of the accident was magnified. The elderly and the persons with disability who required assistance were left to their own means. Children were and continue to be at the risk of thyroid cancer. Nuclear power plant workers, often poor and homeless, were exposed to high levels of radiation and continued to be denied quality health care. Separation of families, constant concern for children, threat of increasing health effects, lack of health facilities, goods and services, and the loss of livelihood has created a climate of fear and anxiety affecting the mental well-being of those involved. It is my understanding that the acute lack of preparedness of the government of Japan in dealing with the situation could have been avoided. In my view, the lack of preparedness of the government was closely connected with the lack of participation of the people in policy decisions. All the plans and decisions related to the power plant and emergency measures were taken without meaningful participation of the people. This is a major issue in Japan, as participation is understood in Japan being the representation through elected representatives. However, participation is not limited to an elected person representing people's interests. It is the partaking of individuals who are likely to be affected or are affected by government policies at all stages of policy making, from formulation, decision making to implementation and monitoring. For instance, in the context of the power plant in Fukushima, the state should have ensured that individuals living around the plant were provided all the information necessary for them to decide whether they wanted the plant in the first place. Had people been involved in designing the emergency measures, it is likely that the person with disability would have been able to access the shelters and remain safe. Involvement in the implementation of the disaster management policy would have ensured that the people would have known the steps to be taken, including consuming iodine, preventing dust or confusion, and unnecessary exposure to radiation. Access to information is another very important right and an aspect of the right to health. People must have access to all the information they need to make informed choices. By not making public the information regarding the radiation dose in the days following the accident, the state violated the right of the people to make choices regarding their lives. With this information, individuals have been able to protect themselves from radiation exposure. Months after the disaster, the government decided to put in place a plan for resettlement of people in areas with safe doses of radiation. This policy of settlement doesn't give people a real choice in the matter. Compensation to people who are not in favor of returning is much less than those who will be returning. Those in need of money may end up returning even if they don't feel safe, only for the money. The government has stated that these areas are safe and there would be no harmful effects of radiation. However, as there are two opposing understandings on the issue of radiation, the government should have provided the people with a real choice by providing compensation to the people, regardless of the place they reside in. A forced option such as this is an affront to the dignity of the people. Finally, the government's actions are largely based on the advice of the International Commission on Radiation Protection, the ICRP. The ICRP's recommendations were based on the principle of optimization and justification, according to which all actions of the government should be based on maximizing good over harm. Such a risk-benefit analysis, that is what is best for the majority, is not in consonance with the right to health framework, as it gives precedence to the collective interest over the individual rights. Under the right to health, the right of every individual has to be protected. Thus, even if one individual is adversely affected, her or his rights must be respected and protected. These are but a few instances I have given which impinge the basic rights of the people and have violated the right to live a life with dignity. If only the government had been inclusive, participatory and transparent in its policy and had not turned a blind eye to TAPCO's lack of safeguards, these blatant violations would have been averted. I must emphasize at this point that the national and international discourse on the issue is still largely dominated by experts or people like me who are far removed from the accident. It is the affected people who must time and again take up this fight, lead the dialogue domestically and internationally. Thank you. Arigato.
はい、極めて深く上からメッセージがあったかなというふうに思います。基本的人権のことについて述べられていました。それでは、第一報告者として、どちらに参よろしくお願いいたします。
このような機会を与えていただいて、感謝します。シシドとしてのお願いします。よろしくお願いします。
Shido, nice to
こう
meet
い
you
う場
all.
で、基本を話すのは、
After the
今まで
accident,
主に妻の方に任せてきた
I
の
have asked
で、
my
実
wife
的には初
to
めて
make
ということ
official
で、かなり緊
presentation
張して
like
おりま
this.
す。
And actually,
そ
this
の
is the
ような少
first
しお
time
詫
for
びい
me
ただ
to
けると
make a
ありがたいで
public
す。
presentation. Therefore,
私
I
が
have
何
tons of
か
advice
ご
in
存
my
知の方
stomach,
がいらっ
and
しゃいましたら、
sorry for that. And
名前不
if
明
you
で
are
ツ
interested
イ
in
ッタ
my
ー
talk,
探してい
you
ただ
can
ければと思い
tweet,
ます
you
の
can
で、
find in the Twitter
もし
by
ご
using
興味
my
ある方
name
は、
as
そちらの
the
方をご覧くだ
searching
さい。
key. And
私
if you
の
want
トーク
to
がどの
listen
よう
to
に
my talk
変わ
more,
るということ
please
なので、
find out
どこ
me
から
from
関わりが始ま
Twitter.
ったのかなという
How
ことを
I
思い出しまして、
decided where I
これから一つ
encountered the
無駄話
science. And you would
方
teach
言
me
があります。
how I got an
すべての方に
interest
は
in
標準語
the
で、元文を語ってあり
science.
ます
I'd
ので、
like
日本
to
語でお聞きの
introduce
方、
the
少々
old
お
talk.
時間です。
And now I'm
それじゃあ、ちょっと難しい
going to
発音
talk
が
in the
ね、
Fukushima dialect.
昔か
Let
ら
me talk about
長
old
年こ
times.
そ、
Once
か
upon a
ら
time, it's well known that the
人に
people
され
in Date and the
人
people
が
in
手な
Soma
る
have
言える
been
とま
at
で
the strife
オーラ
with
が里
each
の花が
other.
美しい
Not
って
only
言
human
って
beings,
他
but
に言う
even
人があったん
frogs
だと
insisted that
無邪
my
気に戻すけどじゃな
village
くて
is better and
教会の山さ登って
that
ぬがいならば
do not
我が
harm
目で見て
us
ることだ
at
した
all. And they tried to
一
bring
斉
this
の
argument
せ
to
で
an
こ
end,
っちも
and
立ち
they
上がっ
had
て
this
こ
bumpy
うぶら
mountain
下が
to
ること見てるじゃ
see
ん
the villages
し
each
たらこ
other
れ
on the
言えることなん
castle
でことが
to
厳
and
し
the
い
tree. They have
だから
observed
ぬ
each
がいが
other's
見たりし
villages.
て
And you
ああ里
know
のことにつ
the
ながったら
frog's eyes
な
at
る
the back
ほど
of
お願
their
いのと
leg
こもなかなか
heads.
美しいんじゃねえ
Therefore,
か
they
となって
believe that
喧
they are
嘩や
looking
め
at
た
the
んだと
opposite
かね
counterpart
と
village,
言
but
うから
actually
今
they
と
are
いう
looking at their own village. And they said
さ
that,
て
okay,
おそ
your
らく
village is really
福島県
beautiful
の
and
外に生
very
まれ
from
育
the
った方
color.
が
Now, those who
違和感な
are
く
born
こ
and
れが
raised
方言
in
だと
the
お思いになっている
non-Fukushima area, you believe
逆に
that
福
now
島県
my
で
talk was
過ごした方はどこか
told
に違和感
in
を感じたはずです
Fukushima dialect.
私は
However,
作
if
為
you
的
know
に
the
複
dialect
数の
of
場所の方
Fukushima,
言を混ぜま
you'll
した
find some the
ですからこれは
uncomfortable feelings
どこ
because
かの
I
方
mix
が
up
でもありません
more than one dialect. Therefore, this is
ですが
actually not
福島県外
an
に出れば
story in
これで美しい福
Fukushima
島が
dialect.
出来上がってしまう
However, you assume that
福島
what
と
I
いうも
gave
のは
you
何な
is
の
a
か
beautiful old
もう一度
story
考
in
えていた
Fukushima.
だきたい
However, I want
話
you
自
to
体を
think
昔
about
からある
what
昔
is
から
the
です
accident,
中
what
の
is
帰り
the
と外の
story.
帰りとい
This
うわ
is
け
really
で
the
ちゃん
actual
と
old
昔話
time
の方の
story.
前週分
There
の
is
この
the
フィールド話です
actually the
私はもともと昔話や民
stories
話を調べたり
compiled
研究したい
in
と思っ
the
て、
Zen
日本
Buddhism
文学館に入り
sacred
そして、結
scripts.
果的に国語の教員になり
And
な
then
った後
I
は
became
そうい
a
うものから
teacher
なかなか
of the Japanese
関わることが
language,
できず
and
に
I
そのこと
didn't
し
have
て、
many opportunities
福
to
島
be
県ですと、
involved in the science, but
大鉄市の
I
現在
barely
の
worked for
それから
Fukushima,
郡町
and
飯
there
舘
was
村
an
の民話
police
調査に参加しております
Machi and Ida
ですから
Devura
そこの
villages
昔話に
where
は私
I
が参加
worked
したもの
involved
が載っ
and
て
the
おりま
old
す
talks,
その
and
中で
some
沖
of
縄
the
のザ・マミ
stories
ソンとかに書かせていただき
were
ま
my
した
work. I
そ
happened to
こ
be
で
in the
見つけ
Zamami
たのが
village in
複雑
Okinawa
な平
in
和な
terms
歴
of
史
the
があり
old
ました
times, and I
だけ
found
ど
there were many
今語ら
aspects
れて
in
いるものはあ
Fukushima.
まりにも
But
こ
what
のペア
people
で
are talking about
激しい
Fukushima
皆
right
さん
now
福
is
島というと
really one
ど
place.
こからどこま
Now,
でお考
speaking
え
of
になるかという
Fukushima,
のを、
what
ち
kind of
ょっ
associations
と
you
こ
may
の話の
have?
中でも問わせていただきます
I'd like to
私の
ask
テーマは
questions in my
福島県の
presentation.
学
The
校は
topic
子
of
供
my
を放射性物質
presentation
から守ろうと
is
しま
now
したとい
whether
うことです
Fukushima Prefecture
サ
tried
ブ
to
テーマは
protect
そ
the
こに書
children
いて
in
ある4
Fukushima
つ
from
に絞
the
りました
radioactive
本
substances
当
and
は
other
もう
subtopics, as you can see
48
here
時
on
間
the
とか72
screen.
時間とか喋りたいこ
I'd
と
like
がある
to talk about the 24/7.
だけここだけに絞らせてい
However,
ただきます
let me focus only on these four topics, as you can see here as the sub-themes. Was there a heads up for radioactive substances in Nakadori in Fukushima Prefecture? Has the mass media reported on accident information appropriately? Was there an adequate call for protection from radioactive substance immediately after the accident? Was the designation of evacuation zone appropriate? These are the topics I'd like to focus on. In 2011, when 311 happened, I worked at the high school in the Fukushima Prefecture. What the Fukushima Prefecture's high schools and junior high schools taken are totally different from what you heard from TV and newspapers. We were not talked about the radiation, and we are not allowed to call for the reduction of the exposure. In addition to that, in classes and the extracurricular activities, we were not or allowed or freely talked about the radiation and accidents. So historically speaking, Fukushima was scattered around and it forcefully became one prefecture, meaning that there is no unity in Fukushima. Therefore, for example, you know the Fukushima prefecture character Kibi-chan. However, this character was imposed to have a logo or character when the national athlete competition was held. And if you do that, it's inevitable to get a complaint. And that's why there is no distinctive characteristics in the features or faces of the character. For instance, Hamadori in Fukushima Prefecture, most of the affected areas are located in the Hamadori. Not so much development has done, and this is a really remote area with lesser level of development. That's why they had to rely on energy industry. The other region is Nakadori. This is the core of the Fukushima Prefecture. Therefore, all of the administrative services were concentrated in Nakadori. Then the third region is Aizu. One of the popular TV programs of Yae, the cherry blossom of Yae, featured Aizu. However, it's not this area. There were children in the past tried to protect the castle of Nihonmatsu. However, they were used as the human shield. It's really disaster. However, this fact was not known because of the poor advertisement and promotion. Iwaki and Soma have a different story also, although they were both existed in Nakadori. And if you look at the Hamadori, Soma, Futaba, and Iwaki are included in this region, and Futaba was the most affected area in 311, and Minami Soma covered both Minami Soma and Soma. However, in the one big reform, these two were artificially incorporated into one, totally different or ignoring the emotions of people living there. Therefore, there is no unity at all at the psychological level of people. It's not a responsibility of the residents. However, it's due to the administrative work. Fukushima, Koriyama, Shirakawa, as well as many more cities and villages existed. For instance, Aizu, Ring, and Aizu Wakamachi. This is the area surrounded by mountains, and there are areas where development work has been done quite a lot, and there's another area, remote area, with heavy snowfalls. Even in Edo period, it was totally different. For example, that city where I lived at one point, it was a territory of Matsumae Road. Sometimes it was controlled by the federal government, and sometimes it was controlled by the royal family. And the 15 years ago, it was united into other villages, and sometimes it was peeled off from the original village. And it's bloodshedding fights conducted in the area. However, there was no detailed known because there's no record, there's no research is conducted, and there was no plan to identify what happened. So this is really a forgotten fact. However, people they had hold the grudge over this history. Now, let me share the current status of the education school education in the Fukushima Prefecture. Most of the students go to public schools. Not so many of them go to the private schools. Therefore, the parent voices and the resident voices can be easily reflected to the actual the operation of public schools through the Board of Education. For example, there is the voice from a mother that the students have to wear the long sleeves and trousers while wearing a mask, and then that request is immediately implemented. And most of the high schools, the prefectural students, and sometimes the policies of the prefecture of Fukushima is prioritized by the ones necessary for the school operation. Now this is the expansion of the evacuation area after the 311. It's expanded more and more, and then finally it's expanded to cover the 20-kilometer radius. I was at the Futaba High School and not quite close to the NPP. Therefore, once accident happens, we have to evacuate, and this is a designated area for evacuation if a trouble happens. And I remember there was a talk among teachers, and we talked that there is the official plan for evacuation within the 10-kilometer radius. However, now policy is expanded to cover 20-kilometer radius. Therefore, we assume that the severity of accident was really high. And that's why such a wide area of evacuation area was designated. However, the Hamadoli and Fukushima Prefecture Administrative Office's response was that why the instruction was given one-sidedly without any consultation as to the severity of the accident was not shared with the heads of the villages and cities. We had worked so hard. Teachers worked so hard. For example, I met with the city mayor of Itate village several times, and I know he has cherished and valued the local residents and communities. I know them, however, he didn't know the severity of the 311 accident, and because of that, it caused the dissatisfaction and antagonistic feeling against the destruction and designation by the government of Japan, and this has led to the distrust among the people living in the Fukushima area. Then what happened to Nakadori and Aizu regions? They were quite independent. They were so autonomic to determine to accept, for example, evacuees from the affected areas, and the people coming from Hamadoli were also accepted by the Nakadoli and Aizu, but no, this is all what they could do. 311 Fukushima Prefecture had the lowest coverage of the earthquake insurance. I got my home, therefore I covered my home under the earthquake insurance. Before coming to the earthquake, I was in Kobe, where the Awaji great earthquake happened. Therefore, I know wherever you are in Japan, there are always a risk of earthquakes. That's why I got the insurance, but not so many Fukushima people did do that. And then at any rate, they tried to accept evacuees. However, it was not sufficient as requested. However, there is no budget and there is no possibility of receiving services or relief materials. And however, the Nakadoli and the people believed that they help out affected people. The local government have just followed the government of Japan instructions, and there is no action to protect because they believed there was no such necessity. Therefore, once they were forced to evacuate, on one hand, and the local government who had accepted evacuees suddenly, both of them did not have the necessary information. That's why such a mess happened. For instance, immediately after the start of evacuation, Kawaguchi village had a poor communication or connectivity through mobile phones because the mobile phone company could not make much profit because of the small number of population, and the blackout happened and the evacuation from Tomioka village came, and there was no communication by the government of Japan or by neighboring local governments, and that confusion has prolonged. And then what happened to the prefectural level? The prefectural building was damaged by the earthquake, and they could not establish the headquarters because of the damage incurred to the building of a prefecture. The headquarters was not established, and this was not communicated at any rate because of the damage incurred to the prefectural government office. They established the head office for the earthquake tentatively in the neighboring building. However, there was no infrastructure for communication. Therefore, they could not collect enough information. And maybe they used this as an excuse not to be able to disseminate the information. Then the Unit 1 exploded. Mass media captured this fact immediately. However, it's not disclosed to the general public. And back then, very severe accident happened. That is, newspaper, TV journalists, and radio journalists, including nationwide broadcasting outlets, there was an order to evacuate. However, there were residents remaining in Iwaki City, and there were residents remaining in Minamisoma. However, they observed all of the journalists running away from their areas. However, this fact has yet to be disclosed because they are the one who ran away from this area first. Still, you can fill the gap. For example, they can broadcast to people, evacuees coming to Kobayama as well as other areas, and they can fill the gap. And then the local TV outlets and the newspaper companies did not admit that there was an order to evacuate, leaving all of the residents left in affected areas. However, citizens knew that they were discarded or they knew they were abandoned. And that's what happened 3.5 years months ago. And then the following day, March 13th, the Kizuna, Fukko recovery, and the Be Strong. These slogans were repeated over and over again through TV and radio broadcasting. And for instance, if you look at Fukushima Minyu, one of the major local TV outlet said that the stand-up Fukushima without being beaten by the disaster. This is the official slogan actually. And what happened to the Miyagi prefecture, if I use the Kahoku Shimbu as an example, the message of overcoming this difficulty together, and this was featured on the following day of March 13th. And then the explosion happened on the 14th of March, and then the prefectural government said to TEPCO that the TEPCO had to announce that there was no negative health impact to the resident.
The government said that's not necessary. That announcement is not necessary, which means that rather than TEPCO, the power company, it was the Fukushima prefectural government who requested the declaration of safety, which means that the Fukushima people were abandoned by their own government. The Fukushima prefectural government and the educational board made a decision on the 14th of March to actually undertake, according to the schedule, the announcement of the results of the Fukushima prefectural high school entrance exam results on 16th of March at noon. That applies for Nakadori and for Aizu region. They did not make any schedule change despite the explosion of the Unit 3. They did not change the decision despite the widespread contamination that was observed on the 15th of March. At that time, we had 20 microsievert per hour or higher contamination, and this is an air dose that was detected in Fukushima City. At that time, the media repeated numerous times that there's no impact to health unless you live within the 30 kilometers. As for the announcement of the entrance exam results for the Fukushima Prefectural High School, well, there's some unique aspect of this, so I'd like to explain briefly. So the announcement is undertaken outdoor. The person, the student, him or herself must attend, which means that the premise is that the student, him or herself, must attend, and everything takes place outdoor, which means that numerous people had to be outdoor on that day. How was the situation on that day? This was the official map that was released by the government. Right before the 16th of March, staff meeting took place among the teachers, and I participated in that meeting as well. And the decision was made that we will undertake the announcement as scheduled and as usual. I asked some questions, but there were others people who asked even stronger questions. For example, art teacher said that it's perhaps better to change the schedule, but other teachers said that it's okay. The prefecture, the government has decided, the board of ed decided. Therefore, without any warning whatsoever, the announcement took place of the test results, and everyone was irradiated due to rain and snow. And we complained that how do you know the actual air dose or the contamination level unless the actual measurement has taken place? Now, the famous Professor Yamashita has claimed that if you live beyond the 30-kilometer radius, you can live as usual. Up until 100 millisievert, there is no impact to health whatsoever. That has been his claim. Professor Yamashita has made this kind of conclusion regarding Chernobyl. The total number of deaths was 30. There was no one else died because of Chernobyl. I know that you know very well that this is a big lie. But however, it was Hiroshima and Nagasaki who admitted and who accepted this conclusion of Professor Yamashita. Now, in the high school in Fukushima, the outdoor activities also resumed. Professor Yamashita again commented regarding this that the only threshold is the 100 millisievert per year. In fact, the parents of the children actually who will be participating in outdoor activities must send and sign a consent form that they have understood the words of Professor Yamashita. And furthermore, some teachers actually insisted that if you really train yourself and make effort, you will be strong enough to combat radiation. Well, you know very well that there is no such thing. And then furthermore, the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Education, Vice Minister Suzuki, made such testimony. He said that I have never heard of such a thing, that I have been actually instructing the educations and schools to abide by the principle of ALARA as low as rationally possible. And so he made a false testimony when he was interviewed by the committee on the investigation of the accident. Now, the schools resumed their ordinary activity in Nakadori and Aizu area as well. And the safety of various areas, including the school facilities, commute route, etc., was not confirmed or checked. My child is in a junior high school, and he was bullied as well because he was concerned of the situation. Now, the swimming lessons and classes also were not resumed in Fukushima, but that was not because they wanted to prevent the children from irradiated from swimming activities. That was because they were worried that they will be sued by people living downstream if they release and unplug the swimming pool, the contaminated water. Now, in terms of the physical education classes in Fukushima, most of the schools actually rejected interviews from the mass media. Only few schools accepted such interview. Most of the schools have not taken any measures whatsoever, but this was falsely reported by the mass media because they only had very few samples. Now, regarding the radiation protection, there was a notice that has been sent. But still, there are jokes that says that well, I might be irradiated. Well, I might not be able to marry anyone outside of Fukushima. These were the jokes that were made. And in terms of the extra curricular activities and PEs, physical educations, no one felt the need to protect the children from radiation. It was considered to be not necessary. The measurement was taken in only two places during a big sports meets. And otherwise, there was no measurement taken and no warning whatsoever in terms of warning to the children.
法律で我々は被爆保護の権利を獲得できたとは
So we cannot say that the law guarantees our rights to protect ourselves from radiation, and the consistent approach and the stance within Fukushima is that it's better not to mention about this right for radiation protection or talk about it. Children are not protected, adults are not even protected less. And that's because Professor Yamashita said that there is absolutely zero impact whatsoever if you are over 40 years old. And he called upon everyone in the audience to just take the mask off from their face. And that kind of stance is still ongoing there. What we really need to demand is that the surveys and tests be undertaken, measurement be undertaken on whatever way that is possible, urine test, etc. The reason why we do not know, we don't have the information is because nothing is tested and there is no data. And that because we don't know, we cannot claim the right of our protection against radiation. I'm sorry that I spoke very rapidly, but I'm happy to answer any of your questions later on. Thank you very much. Mr. Shishido, thank you very much. You have pointed out some very important facts. We have the 3 sessions today, and we have people, the actual testimonies of people who were on the victim side, and that actually puts weight into the information that we provide during the symposium. If you have questions for Mr. Shishido, please do not hesitate to write down the question on the paper and give it to me. And as much as the time allows, I'd like to cover these questions as well. Now, moving forward, I'd like to call upon the second speaker, which is Mrs. Kuniko Tanioka, please. Professor Tanioka, as indicated in the document, she was the member of the lower house. She was within the Democratic Party, and as I mentioned briefly earlier, she has been a key person in the realization of the Act on Protection and Support for the Victim of Nuclear Power Plant Accident. So, Mrs. Tanioka, please.
Thank you
very much for kind introduction. We have heard a very heavy story from Mr. Shishido, and I remember what happened on that day, and I tried to remember what I did on the moment when 3/11 happened. Since yesterday, this symposium started in the morning session today. I have to think that I'm really fortunate to be invited in this symposium, and at the same time, I feel how important it is for the people who control information to manipulate information under the good name of risk communication. They hide the information and they disclose only the convenient so-called fact. And actually, behind the scene, there is the information manipulation happened. Not the actual culprit, however, the victims are pointing their fingers at each other. And this is a trick we have been put because of the information manipulation. Back then, I was the Diet Parliament member of the ruling party of the Democratic
Party of Japan, meaning that my position was totally different. You regard me as the one of the culprit. However, in order to enact the act to support victims, being one of the culprits was very important. When 3/11 happened, just like you, it was very shocking to me. When I talked about the colleague, the parliament members, we frequently talked that what to do with the spent fuel loads. Because whenever the actual work has been implemented, there were people exposed to the radiation, and it seems like a Pandora's box. Because if I really seriously take up this issue, I somewhat know that there is no career as a parliament member. And I was also the educator. Therefore, as a politician, I know that if I take up this issue, there is no future as a politician. So I now realize that I didn't pick up the issue about the nuclear power generation. However, then 3/11 happened. I realized what I did not do rather than I think that what I did do. And then I realized the importance of what I did not do. And then, needless to say, because we didn't raise any voices, there was no preparation at all on the side of the government of Japan. If we wanted to do anything, there was no legal framework at all. However, when it comes to manipulation by a certain group of people to a certain group of people happened quite an early phase after 3/11. Now I can tell it. For instance, in the autumn, there is a fact disclosed in the autumn. However, just following the example of Chernobyl, Ukraine, under the instruction of the Ministry of Health, many children were evacuated by using many buses, chartered buses, and one vice minister said it, and then I got the fact from Tepco too. However, at the public office of the Prime Minister, including Prime Minister himself, there was no proposal made to evacuate the children by using buses under the excuses that there are so many things they had to do, and I believe they didn't want to cause any panic, including the major streets and roads in Tohoku area. The many traffic roads were disrupted, and I understand that they didn't want to do any panic, and there was a tacit agreement not to talk about such an evacuation plan. However, as one of the members of the ruling party, I had to think about what we to do. Because of the tsunami, the one area was detached from any other parts of Japan, and we didn't know anything. Even a week after that, or 2 weeks after that, there were tens of thousands of vacation points, and we didn't have enough information about the shelters, and we didn't know where to bring what. That is the situation immediately after the 3/11, and that turmoil. Nobody thought about the evacuation of children. That's what I wanted to believe. However, it's not the case, and I knew it in the autumn. There was a talk of the evacuation of children. There was a discussion by the government of Japan. I knew it in the autumn of 2011, and then as one of the members of the ruling party members, it was really a shock to me, and then I determined not to be the culprit anymore. And after the enactment of the act to support the victims, I determined to resign the member of the Democratic Party of Japan because of this fact. I don't know what you think about, however, as I mentioned, evacuation by using buses. At the same time, around on the 15th of March, one parliament member said that there must be a speedy system. However, by then nobody knew speedy. And then some other parliament members said that we needed to collect information 3
monitoring activities. And then back then, I was a member related to the Ministry of Education, that we didn't know anything about that. And then after studying that, and several weeks after that, I have insisted that we have to measure the strontium till the end. I even now claim that we have to measure and monitor strontium. However, such a measurement is not implemented. I know it's difficult to get an accurate measurement of strontium. However, the 1 month after or 2 months after the 311, maybe there was no room to do that. But now that 3 years have passed, and with advanced technologies, it's extremely difficult, but it's not impossible. Actually, strontium remains in the contaminated water, and it's proven by the measurement of technical. There's a ways of measurement. However, when it comes to the impact to the health, especially for the health impact on children, we have to know it, and for 5 years have passed. Then the strontium measurement is not possible. The cesium-137 is very difficult to measure. However, because I'm in charge of the decontamination, and that's one of the mothers who has to protect the health of children, strontium can be sneakingly they enter into the teeth and bones of a child, and once strontium is taken up by our body, it does not go away different from the cesium-137. We have to know the impact of the strontium. However, still such a very dangerous radioactive nuclides of strontium is not measured. And then the budget issue. Or those who where the parliament members can see the so-called rotating doors to the private sector, they were quite fast in taking action. Decontamination is another example. This is related to the environment work, and there is a so-called the decontamination bubble in the environmental area. There is the civil engineering work related to the decontamination, and I know there is such thing as decontamination booming, and where we can check and control. Then officials. You can check the number of officials. The budget is an important factor. However, one of the measures I'd like to present is how the people are assigned to each section. If you look at the head count in each section or department, you can see the priority of the government of Japan. For instance, in the environmental ministry, there were more than 270 new headcounts assigned to the department working for decontamination in the environmental ministry, and many of them are related to civil engineers, meaning that the officials can see the rotating door to the private sectors after resigning the ministry. 270 or more than that, and then including MAF. They said that they have to take action for the ground-based reputation, and there are many new headcounts assigned. And what's most interesting to me is the assignment of people to the Ministry of Finance as well as the Ministry of the Consumer Protection. For example, liquor or the sake is under the jurisdiction of the MOF, Ministry of the Finance. And there are 6 to 8 new headcounts assigned to check the safety of the liquor, sake. And then when it comes to the Consumer Protection Agency, they are assigned to ensure the safety through food, and there are 3 headcounts. However, as to the liquor, 6 to 8 people are assigned, although liquor is consumed by the adults older than 20 years, and then food that's not consumed by any people, including mothers and children. However, assignment people to such an important agency of consumer protection, just 3. Now you see the hidden agenda of the government of Japan, and the priority can be seen transparently even from your eyes, and you see what the government of Japan is doing. From the back side of the vaccine, I can see there is a really hidden agenda of the government. And it's really chagrin to me because no matter how strongly I raise the voice, all of those claims falls onto the deaf ears. Then Chernobyl, After 5 years after the Chernobyl accident, the law was enacted, and in that related law, applicable law, the affected people themselves have to make their own decisions because of the right of the option is admitted. For example, the option to live there or the option to evacuate. It's up to the residents, and if they determine to live there is a right to ensure safe food and water, and if they determine to go out, then they prioritize the ration of the food and education is considered by the government of Russia, and the so-called gray zone from 1 to 5 includes a gray zone area, or if those level is beyond above 5, the mandatory evacuation is applied. Since March, I have observed what the government of Japan have taken, and the beyond the Iron Curtain, we cannot see them. However, the right of the general public was not admitted, and there is no such thing as the human rights because they lived beyond the Iron Curtain. However, we are inferior to the Russian people, and it's really shocking to me. Think about it. 25 years ago, by the way, there is a 25-year interval existed between Chernobyl and 3/11, and what Russia has done 25 years ago is better than what the government of Japan do in terms of the humanitarian aspect. And then human rights, we just ignore human rights. We looked down on Russia because of the lack of human rights. However, what we did is actually inferior to the Russian government, and therefore I believe there are some legal framework at the culmination, such as the Act of the Protection of the Survivors. At any rate, we have to enact to ensure the rights of victims. And back then, we tried to enact many related laws, such as support of general public. You should not think that this can be done only within the beltway, or you have to garner the support non-Nagatacho or non-beltway people. This was the advice I got. And then I encountered the